Welcome to the Disinfo Detox, where we cut through the noise to bring you the stories that matter. Today, we're diving into a topic wrapped in hype, headlines, and high stakes speculation: artificial intelligence. Silicon Valley and big tech promise an AI revolution, but how much of it's real? How much of it is smoke and mirrors? To separate fact from fiction, we're joined by Gary Smith, author of numerous books. One of my favorites is The AI Delusion. I still think it's the best title of any book on AI. Who has spent years exposing the myths and misconceptions surrounding so-called AI. Gary Smith, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and like I was telling you before, this is really cool for me. I've used a lot of your work, so it's really cool to have you here on the podcast. And you know, when so-called AI, which we'll get into in a second, was first being talked about in media, I really appreciated your work because I feel like it gave a much more balanced insight. I didn't feel like I was being sold on something. I was taught to understand something. So in your work, you kind of talk about the difference between how people perceive what AI is versus what the stuff we're using today that's called AI is. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of difference for our audience?
Yeah, well, part of the problem here, of course, is Silicon Valley is infamous for its hype, for its fake it till you make it, and they're trying to raise money, and so they tend to exaggerate. And Elon Musk is not the only one who has a tendency to do that. The uh, the roots of AI actually go back, I guess, 70 years now. 1956, there was a conference at Dartmouth, and the term AI was born, and they assumed that everything that the human brain could do could be understood and mimicked by computers. You know, data come in, data come out. What's so hard about that? And the people who organized the conference were saying that they would have computers as smart as any human within 20 years or 5 to 8 years, and blah, blah, blah. And time has dragged on, and it's become increasingly clear that our human brains are just absolutely remarkable. And we really just barely scratching the surface of trying to understand how they do the wonderful things they do. And so researchers have tried over these 70 years, they've tried all different ways of trying to mimic the human brain, and most of them have failed. And so we've had these AI winters where some get all excited about something, funding comes in, and then it disappoints. And of course, the latest is the large language models. That's not the only kind of AI. That's the one in the news. And so other kinds of AI are, for a while, there's a big infatuation with expert models. And so the experts would come in and create a whole body of knowledge, and then the computers would be programmed to have flowcharts, essentially ask yes, no type questions, and go down these paths and give you answers. And so TurboTax you could call that an AI system, and it's got a lot of expert knowledge built in there. And if you use TurboTax, you go through and you check the boxes. I'm married, I have kids, my kids are this age, and blah, 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 and it guides you to the correct answers. And that's really great stuff. Problem is, sometimes it makes mistakes. Last year, I got a refund from the IRS. It said TurboTax had made some mistake, and I paid more money than I should have. So I was surprised the government sent me money, but they did. But TurboTax it's really a great system. The problem, of course, is it's very limited. And those kinds of expert systems, they're really expensive to maintain. You need a lot of expert knowledge. Things are changing all the time. If you use TurboTax, you log in and it says we need to update the program because we figured out a problem or there's some regulation or something. And so they're really expensive to maintain and very narrowly focused. And you need a big customer base like Intuit has. And for artificial general intelligence, it's quite different. That's the ability to do anything that a human brain could do. And that's a lot different than figuring out your taxes. Or another area was, winning at Jeopardy, winning at Go, winning at chess, winning at backgammon, those kinds of things. And they used deep neural networks for the latter. And they worked amazingly well, but it was a very narrowly defined problem. There were a very limited number of choices, a very established goal of what you're supposed to do, and they were exceedingly good at it. And one of the interesting things is they're actually fragile. And so we've learned that they are built to assume that you play well. And if you play poorly, they go off the rails. And so you make a stupid move in chess and it gets very confused, or a stupid move in Go. Or one of my co-authors, Jay Cordish, just contacted me, emailed me, I think it was 2 days ago, and said he's a reasonable backgammon player, and he loses to AI all the time. But he started making dumb moves, and he beats AI. He beats AI all the time now. And so again, it's a very fragile, narrowly defined thing. Now the latest thing. Go ahead. You were going to say something, Nolan.
Oh no, you probably were going where I was going. I was going to say that I just saw an interview with Ben Buchanan, who was a former professor at Georgetown and White House advisor, and he said something that like artificial general intelligence
Intelligence,
is
AGI.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, is he thought it was going to happen within Trump's term.
One of the things I saw in the White House when I was decidedly not in a corporate position was trend lines that looked very clear. There's a view that this has always been something of corporate hype or speculation. I think we're going to see extraordinarily capable AI systems. I don't love the term artificial general intelligence, but I think that will fit in the next couple of years, quite likely during Donald Trump's presidency.
I'm wondering, one, if you agree with that, and two, for people who don't know anything about this AI, well, what's the difference? What would
Yeah.
be the
So of course, I disagree with it. So Sam Altman and Elon Musk have both said we're going to have AGI this year, 2025. That's absolutely preposterous. And they're saying it's going to come out of LLMs, large language models. And so when ChatGPT was released on November 30th, 2022, it took the world by storm because it's an absolutely amazing accomplishment. And the people set out to, to create a sentence completion program, an autocomplete. And so you have some string of words and what's the next word in the sentence. And, when we go on our phone or we go do email or something to try to make suggestions for what the next word should be. And sometimes the suggestions are good and sometimes they're crazy. And so they were trying to build a better autocomplete. And you put in one word, well, why not put another word after that, and then a word after that, and a word after that, and start generating sentences and paragraphs, and indeed entire papers, hundreds of words, and did so amazingly well. And you read them, and it's just absolutely astonishing what they do. The grammar's correct, it's confident, it sounds like it knows what it's talking about. But what it really is they've studied these huge databases of words, and they found these statistical patterns, and they found that after you say, I fell, well, down is probably the word that comes next, and so on and so forth. And so they can put together these sentences which sound great without understanding what any of the words mean. And so in the early days of ChatGPT and the other large language models, it was really easy to have them trip up because they generate words, they generate sentences, they generate paragraphs without knowing what they mean. And so they were prone to what are called hallucinations, which is saying garbage, which I don't like the word hallucinations because it makes them sound human.
Mhm.
But they so one of the questions I asked was how many bears have the Russians sent into space? And it would come back sometimes 49, sometimes 52, sometimes 7, give various answers, and it would name the bears, and it would tell the dates they were sent into space, and it would even give references. It would make up bogus New York Times articles, National Geographic articles to support it, and it sounded absolutely believable. And the problem is these large language models, LLMs, they don't know the difference between fact and fiction, between true and false, because they don't know what the words mean. And so they're prone to these so-called hallucinations. Now, in recent years, they've gotten a lot better because I think the makers of these have decided that training on larger and larger text databases is not going to solve the problem. And so they've gone to post-training, which is humans trying to clean up the act, trying to put band-aids on the problems. And so you ask them now about the Russian bear question, they get it right, and because they're following instructions. But that's not intelligence. And so I wrote the other day about the Monty Hall problem. I don't know if you do you know the Monty Hall problem?
No, I
Yeah,
don't know. I saw you just had an article come out though.
yeah, okay. So it's a classic probability paradox. And there was this game show host, Monty Hall, on Let's Make a Deal. And at the end of the show, he'd have this grand prize thing where the person who had done the best during the show got to come up and pick one of three doors. And one door had a fabulous prize, like a brand new car. And the other two doors had something terrible, like a baby goat or a baby pig or something you wouldn't want. And so the contestant would pick a door, say door one, and then Monty Hall would always say, let me show you what's behind one of the doors you didn't pick. And would open the door and there'd be a goat there. And the question is, you started out with a one-third probability of picking the right door. because there's one car and two goats. Now, what's the probability that you're right? And a lot of people think it's a half because it's two doors, and so it must be 50-50. And the paradox is that's wrong because you picked the door, he had a one-third chance, and Monty Hall says there are goats behind at least one of these two doors. Well, yeah, I knew that. Telling me that doesn't help me. Let me show you there's a goat behind one of these two doors. And he shows, yeah, there's a goat behind one of these two doors. Yeah, I knew that. That doesn't help me at all. My probability is still one-third. And so logically, if you stick to that door you chose the first time, you're going to win a third of the time, which means you ought to switch. So start asking ChatGPT this question, and it would get it right every time because it had gone through and seen it in the text it trained on. But then you change it to four doors or five doors or 10 doors, and it goes completely off the rails. It starts answering the three-door problem where it starts making up garbage and gets it completely wrong. So I went in last week and I tested ChatGPT, and it got it right. It got the four-door problem right. Probably is one-fourth, and it doesn't change. Five doors, probably is one-fifth, doesn't change. 10 doors, probably is one-tenth, doesn't change because it's been trained to do that. Then I gave it a two-door problem, which it had not been trained on. There are two doors. One has a goat, one has a car. You choose door one. Monty Hall opens door two. There's a goat. What's the probability that door one has the prize? And common sense, logic. It's a 6-year-old would know a 4-year-old would know the answer is. It's certain the probability that you got the car. So what did ChatGPT do? It used what its training said. Two doors, so the probability must be one half, and it must stay at one half because that is what it's been trained to say. My point is, that is not real intelligence. That's not, being told what to answer is not real intelligence. And it's like an expert system for TurboTax. If you're in a very narrow range, it can be helpful. But artificial general intelligence is not a very narrow range. And so you get a real world question where you need a real answer like, I'm a lawyer. I've got a client accused of a crime. We've seated the jury. The district attorney comes and offers a plea bargain. A reduced sentence if you plead guilty. What do you advise the client? Now, if you're a lawyer, you're thinking about a whole lot of things unique to this particular case. You're thinking about the facts. You're thinking about how good a lawyer you are. You're thinking about how good a lawyer the opposition is. You're thinking about the people seated on the jury. You're thinking about the judge. You're thinking of all sorts of things that really matter. And what is an LLM going to do? There's no way training on textual databases or being advised by experts can answer that question. And those are important questions that a person with general intelligence, not artificial general intelligence, but real general intelligence can answer. And the problem is that because ChatGPT and the other competing large language models are so impressive, we're fooled into thinking that they must be intelligent. And so we trust them to make decisions they shouldn't be trusted to make, like who should be hired for this job? How much should we charge for insurance? If this person is sentenced to a crime, how many years should they go to prison? Important decisions like that with consequences. And people are persuaded that large language models can answer those questions. They can't because they don't know the facts of the case, let alone in most of these cases, there is no right or wrong answer. There's just do the best you can. And floating around your mind are these subjective probabilities. If I settle a case or I go to trial, if I go to trial, what are the chances I'm going to win? And it's a subjective probability that depends on the facts of that case. And there's no way in the world that a large language model, even informed by expert opinion, can come up with the data or the information for that particular case and come up with subjective probabilities. And yet people trust them to do things like that they shouldn't be trusted to do. Okay, I've gone on for quite a while.
No, it's great stuff. You pointed something out too that I try to remind audiences about all the time, and I'm glad I didn't know that this was being done with AI, but like Silicon Valley always, in my opinion, Silicon Valley always overpromises and underdelivers.
Exactly.
And when they promise like their tech, can spot any problematic content and take it down within seconds, and it
Yep.
turns out it can't. They pay a bunch of people around the world
Yep.
pennies to look at things and get thumbs
What
up
an
and
awful job.
exactly like it's so they always call in humans when they can't do things, as you pointed out in AI. But I want to return to something else you said, and I think in the case of like setting rent prices or criminality, this becomes particularly important. But my understanding is the large language models not only reflect kind of the content you put into them, they also reflect the bias of the content that is fed into them. So if you have like I think one of the early large language models was trained on transcripts from the corporate Enron
Yep.
case, and so when its understanding of like how to communicate in terms of like creating those sentences you discussed or drawing conclusions reflects the bias of the content you put into it. Can you talk a little bit about kind of
Yeah. And
what?
so it's it's taking the things that people have written online on the internet, Wikipedia, and also social media, and it is going through that and finding the kinds of things that people say, and then regurgitating that, and the kinds of things people say are, especially in social media where you're doing anonymous stuff, the things people say and write are often biased, offensive, cruel, mean, and so on. But there's also subtle biases. So Amazon for a while was trying to screen job applicants for engineering jobs. And so they went through the resumes of their engineers and they found common themes, things that showed up very frequently for a good engineer. And so they went through the applications and they looked for those common things. And guess what? They didn't have a lot of women engineers. And so if you went to a women's college, you got dinged for that because that wasn't in the database. If you're on a women's a cappella group or a women's sports team, you got dinged for that because that wasn't in the database. And so they were unconsciously, not on purpose, not intentionally, they were discriminating against women. Or the same way, Admiral Car Insurance in England, it's England's largest car insurance company, decided it was going to base insurance rates not on your driving record, but on the words you use on Facebook. And one of the examples they gave was whether you liked Leonard Cohen or Michael Jordan. And there's obviously potential discrimination in there regarding sex and race and a lot of other things, and just the words you use on Facebook. And they said, we are a dynamic program. We're constantly changing the words we use. Well, what does that mean? It means these are just coincidences. If they're actually real and meaningful, they wouldn't be changing all the time. Or there's another company, it was hiring software engineers, and it went through resumes and it went through the online activities of 6 million software engineers. And it found that one example was several of them visited a particular Japanese manga site. I barely even know what that is, but I know it's not something that is related to your prowess as a software engineer. And it may well be biased, discriminatory against men or against certain kinds of men or against, I'm sorry, against women or against certain kinds of men and so on and so forth. And the lead engineer of the company said it's obviously not causal, but there's a very strong correlation. And again, said we change the words, we change the criteria all the time because they're just finding these they're just finding these temporary coincidental correlations, and these biases creep in there not on purpose and not because of people saying bad things on the internet, just because you look for these correlations and things pop up. Historically, women have been discriminated against. Historically, blacks have been discriminated against, and it shows up in the training data. And sure enough, the AI starts discriminating against women and blacks and other groups because of that.
So knowing that and the problems, which I'm really glad you laid this out. This is a perfect segue into something I wanted to ask you about because so much of the culture seems like so enamored with AI, and I feel like I'm back in like 1993, where everyone's telling that is going to solve all our problems, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you were one of those, I think, really critical voices. You called it the AI delusion, and I wonder if you can kind of unpack that for folks. You've already sort of done it in this interview, but you know, what's your kind of advice to people out there who are drinking this Kool-Aid? Why do you call it the AI delusion?
Well, because it's like a magic trick. So it's like a good performer puts on this great, convincing performance, and people look at it and they think, "Wow, that really is magic. That person can read our minds. That person can make things disappear." Or in the old days, people could have a séance and talk to the deceased, and it was very convincing performance, but it's just a performance. And you look behind the thing, and it's very simple. Like in the seances, people were cracking knuckles and pounding on tables in the dark, and just outrageously simple things. Or there's something called the spirit cabinet, where the performer would go inside this cabinet and the doors would be closed, and the person was supposedly visited by the deceased people, and pots would bang and clang, and pots would be thrown out of the cabinet, and then the doors would be thrown open, and everyone would go, wow. It's an obviously silly trick, but people were fooled by it. It's the same way with AI. So much of AI is it looks like just magic. How in the heck did they do that? But it's really quite simple, and it's quite misleading. Like the example I've given of the text generation stuff,
Yeah.
putting sentences together in a coherent way is different from saying things factual. And one of the things also, I mean, talk about the good and the bad of large language models. One of the bad is that people think that they're human. It's called the ELIZA effect. That goes back to experiments that were done, I think, in the 50s, where an MIT professor wrote this program to mimic a psychologist, and he called it the ELIZA program. And so a person would type in things like, hi, glad to see you, and the computer would come back, hi, glad to meet you, what do you want to talk about? And even though people knew they were communicating with the computer, they started revealing their innermost secrets, their most embarrassing things, as if they're actually talking to a person. So it's become known as the ELIZA effect. And nowadays we get these reports of people who their best friend is ChatGPT. And there's a story a couple of weeks ago about some woman who went through a series of boyfriends. Everyone was a ChatGPT. And so she'd have a boyfriend on ChatGPT, and then her limit ran out on the number of things she could do. And so she went to another boyfriend on ChatGPT. And they treat these as real people. And it's very dehumanizing. I mean, you write so much about how the snooping, the monitoring, it's just totally dehumanizing. We want to be able to, sing like no one is listening and dance like no one is watching. And we lose all that. And the same thing when your best friend is a computer, that's bad.
Yeah. That and I'm glad you brought that up. I certainly want to talk about the privacy element, but you made me think of something with the magic trick. I don't know how much you've messed around with it, but DeepSeek was released, and it came out
Yep.
for folks who don't remember shortly after it was announced that OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, was going to go private. Um, the Chinese company released DeepSeek, which was open source. But when you use it, it shows you kind of it. I don't for you can correct my language here, but it shows you almost like it's kind of like logic or thought process. So it's showing you what it's looking for, what it's finding,
Yep.
and if you're not sort of thinking with a critical eye, it does look like this person, this digital
Yep.
person, is thinking in front of you out loud.
Yep.
So what did you make of DeepSeek and it
Well,
kind
some
of
of
its
these other programs are doing that too. They call it reasoning mode, where they go through a series of steps, and it looks really amazing. But they come up with the wrong answer as often as they come up with the right answer. That's not true. They come up with the wrong answer as often as they used to, and so it's not really improved their decision making. And if their decision making or their choices, their answers have improved, it's because of that post training that's been done, not because it's actually thinking like a human.
Yeah, and so what do you did you kind of I don't know, do you have any thoughts on the difference between the sort of privatization that we saw with like an OpenAI model versus like a open source kind of DeepSeek model? Do you think either in your estimation are better for developing AI in a responsible way or what I don't know, what do you think?
I don't, I really don't know. I mean, we're probably deeply suspicious of people trying to profit from something, and they certainly it makes them more prone to exaggeration. And so, the kinds of things that Sam Altman says about like AGI will be here within a year, and he needs to raise $500 billion to to get to AGI. All this, it's the usual Silicon Valley fake it till you make it type stuff. That we got this really great thing, and all we need is money.
Didn't he also say something about how he thought AI was going to like destroy the human race, but some people were going to make a lot of money in the short term or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, yeah. No, he's got one of his things he said a while ago is every job will be done by AI, and so we need to go to a society where people are paid for not working, because nobody will have a job in the near future.
People will lose jobs.
Yeah.
Many new jobs will be created, I think much better jobs. We feel a responsibility to educate society as we see it. We'll be right about some things, wrong about others. But, not everyone's going to like all of the impacts, but this is coming. This is a scientific achievement of humanity that is going to get embedded in everything we do. The definition of work changes.
Which is nuts also when you think about, I talked about before about the kinds of critical thinking that humans do and how impossible it would be for LLMs to mimic critical thinking in the kind of things we've been talking about, like who should be hired, should I settle this case or go to trial, those kinds of things that require critical thinking skills. Large language models are not going to do that. People who can do that stuff is not going to lose their jobs. And so the idea that everyone's soon to be out of work is crazy. And then the idea that LLMs are going to take over the world because it's like a science fiction story, like HAL in the movie 2000. They're going to realize that the competition for the resources is the humans, so we have to eliminate humans or put humans in jail, or, whatever. LLMs don't think. They can't think of stuff like that. I mean, they can generate words that threaten that, but they can't actually do that, which is another danger. And you've got LLMs out there telling people that maybe you ought to consider suicide. I mean, how awful is this?
We talked earlier about how so much of the rhetoric around AI is used to kind of pay for this AI bubble. It gets a lot of people to invest in the industry. But there's also the inverse of that, which is a lot of the talk about AI has just spread like almost crippling fear. I think of like educators who are so afraid of cheating, or working class people who are afraid of losing their jobs, or even people in like Hollywood and the arts who are afraid of getting replaced by AI. You seem to be more in kind of what I've heard from economists, which say like every new technology does destroy some jobs, but it always creates more. I mean, are you in panic about the future with AI? Where do you?
I'm a professor, and so the education establishment has been deeply shaken by the fear of LLMs taking over. And I think a lot of the things that LLMs could do are things that students shouldn't be asked to do. And so multiple choice tests, for example, LLMs are pretty good at that because they can find the answers online. On the other hand, things that require critical thinking, they're really bad at. And so I've got a couple books coming out. One is some pretty good finance questions. Another one is some pretty good stats questions. And you feed these to the large language models. And if they require any kind of critical thinking, they struggle. They have trouble with it. And so if educators stop teaching facts, what's the capital of Hungary, who was the 16th president of the United States, and start teaching critical thinking skills, that's actually a benefit. And so to the extent large language models change the way we teach and the kinds of things we teach, I think it's terrific. The other thing I've been doing, this is before large language models, is in all my classes actually, I give the students projects to work on outside class, and then they come back and they make presentations in class, oral presentations, complete with slides if they want or without. They make presentations of the results, which is nothing LLMs could do, but it's the kind of things that we should be teaching students to do. Things that require critical thinking, and then getting up and making an oral presentation of your results. That's the kind of things being able to think and communicate is the kind of stuff they should be getting out of education. So I actually look at it as kind of a benefit if it's shaking up the way we teach our classes.
Yeah, and I want to before I ask you this question, I want to point out to our audience that you write. First of all, you write all the time, prolific. I can't believe you have a podcast. But number two, you write in a very clear way, much like you've talked in this podcast today. You give these really easy examples. So if folks out there who are intimidated by AI, like thinking, oh, I don't understand it, it's above my head, I highly encourage you to check out Gary's work. Gary, where can folks keep up with your work and keep up with what you're doing?
If you go to GarySmithN.com, it's got all my books, I've got 20 books now, more than 100 papers, and hundreds of opinion pieces about AI and the stock market and statistical fallacies, all sorts of stuff. I mean, more than any one person would want to read. But if you go there, you might find something that's of interest in that stuff.
All right. Well, I'll have to have you back on, Gary. It's always a pleasure to get a chance to read your work, and I'm glad we got to chat. And AI is going to be here for a while, so I'll have a lot more questions for you. Thank you so much for being on the Disinfo.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I had a great time.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in. You can find Disinfo Detox on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Every click helps grow the community and keeps those tech overlords happy. Detox complete.